want to talk about this block of wood first, just to get him out of the way, because in many respects he's the least important person that we'll be talking about on tonight's show. But he's important to me. Keir Starmer, he was barracked, even rudely, although not a finger was laid upon him, in a barney in Whitehall this week, a barney that he deliberately chose to walk through. A barney of about 40 people. Their presence there was not a secret. You didn't need bloodhounds to tell that they were there, if you know what I mean. He could have walked along the embankment just outside my window, in through the doors of Portcullis House, where I sat for many years myself, and walked through an entirely private walkway into the Parliament building. But he didn't. He came out of the Ministry of Defence building and walked, rather than was driven in the officially provided state security, bulletproof, bomb-proof, even insult-proof automobile that the country provides for him. He decided to walk through a rough house of people led by someone called Piers Corbyn, brother of Jeremy Corbyn, about whom more in a minute. They shouted things at him, poor lamb. They shouted things like, "Why did you prosecute Julian Assange?" They shouted things like, "Why are you betraying the working class?" All kinds of mean things like that. The things that they shouted were all, as it happens, entirely truthful. Doesn't always happen that way, but on this occasion they were entirely truthful. The entire British broadcast media machine went into overdrive to blame the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, for this roughhouse in which no one had a finger laid upon them. The problem is, they said, someone shouted, who knows who, "Why didn't you prosecute Jimmy Savile?" This is now described by the state broadcaster BBC as a false claim. But it is not a false claim. Just like the fact that Keir Starmer assisted, in fact, persisted in assisting the fake prosecution of Julian Assange. You'll remember that Boris Johnson said to Keir Starmer, "You spent more time prosecuting journalists and not prosecuting Jimmy Savile, the notorious paedophile who sexually assaulted, raped, and abused literally hundreds of people, all the while being a star of the British Broadcasting Corporation." The BBC now says on every news bulletin that Boris Johnson's claim is a false claim. But it is not a false claim. First of all, Keir Starmer undoubtedly spent a lot of his time prosecuting journalists. And secondly, Jimmy Savile was never prosecuted, although Keir Starmer was the director of public prosecutions. Now, he says he was not in charge of the file on whether or not Savile should be prosecuted. But he was the head of the department, and the file was with one of his underlings. His underling was deciding whether to prosecute a knight of the realm, Sir Jimmy Savile, a friend of the royal family, particularly close with Prince Charles, the heir to the throne. He was considering whether to prosecute one of the best known men in the land, a fixture of the BBC for many decades. So if Keir Starmer was not involved in the decision not to prosecute Jimmy Savile, why not? Who but the Director of Public Prosecutions should have been overseeing a decision of that magnitude with all of its potential to embarrass the royal family, to shame the BBC and to shock the entire country and its population. If he didn't get involved, why didn't he get involved? So actually, Johnson's jibe was entirely truthful, and incitement by telling the truth didn't used to be an offense, although it is now, as many of us are finding. Telling the truth can be a dangerous practice, as you may find in weeks to come, even here on the mother of all talk shows, which is why I say to you now, if you have not done so, you must follow me on my Telegram channel, because it is perfectly possible, depending on what happens after St. Valentine's Day, that's the only place you'll be able to find me. So please download Telegram and follow my Telegram channel. If you want to keep hearing from me, of course. If you want to hear me speak what I believe to be the truth. I might be wrong, I might be right, I might be somewhere in between, but you can be sure that whatever I'm saying to you, I'm saying because I believe it. It is a channel that is our last resort. So please, we'll give you the address later on the screen, I think. Is it somewhere? t.me/George Galloway. Please do it in the course of this show. Why am I sounding alarmed? Well, I'm alarmed on your behalf. It won't actually silence me. But there is every possibility that war is about to break out in the Ukraine with Sir Keir Starmer's full backing. It's a strange kind of opposition we have in the British Parliament. You support everything that the government does. Only later do you, in hindsight, make criticisms. But there might not be any hindsight if the balloon goes up in the Ukraine. Now, I have said to you repeatedly, and I say it to you again now, Russia will not invade Ukraine, but Ukraine may very well invade the millions of ethnically Russian people who live in the eastern part of their country, who were granted, according to the Minsk Agreement, autonomous status. An agreement signed by France and Germany, signed by the Ukrainian government itself, that would recognize these people as autonomous of the coup regime with its fascist base in the Azov battalion and the street forces around the Hitler ally Bandera, would grant them autonomous status. This is important. It's not a piece of semantics on my part. These people were promised, guaranteed in fact, in the Minsk Agreement, autonomous status. If, as may be happening even as I speak, the Ukrainian armed forces, armed by Britain, the United States, and other NATO allies, pumped full, like a turkey, pumped full, stuffed with NATO weaponry, launches an attack tonight or tomorrow, or Tuesday or Wednesday, as the Americans have predicted, war will break out, then indeed there will be war, because Russia cannot, how could it, stand by and allow millions of ethnic Russians, hundreds of thousands of them Russian citizens, to be massacred by NATO weapons in the hands of fascist and extreme nationalist forces in the Ukrainian armed forces. Of course, it could not. And so if such a massacre were to begin, then I have no doubt at all that the Russian armed forces would have to come to the defense of their compatriots, of their fellow citizens in some cases, and of their own blood. That will be billed as a Russian invasion of Ukraine, but it will not be. It will be a defense of Russian people being invaded by a government that has already granted those people autonomous status within Ukraine. These are important distinctions that you must learn now before it is too late. If that happens, then we're promised the mother of all sanctions regimes against Russia. That will have many consequences. The first of those will be there'll be no more Russian gas in Europe. Don't worry, Joe Biden has already got tankers on the ocean, bringing you much more expensive American LPG that will not fill even a tiny percentage of the gas supply that will be lost from Russia. That gas powers 50% of German energy requirements and about 25% of all European gas requirements. In Britain, it's low, about 5%. But that 5% will be missed and will cause still further rises in the price of energy. In Europe, the factories will halt. The wheels will stop turning. There will be millions of people unemployed, but don't worry. If there is a war in the Ukraine, there will be millions, maybe 5 millions, maybe 10 millions of Ukrainian refugees flooding west into Europe. They just haven't told you that yet. But you can take it from me that the refugee flow from a war in Ukraine will make all previous refugee crises in Europe seem like a vicar's tea party. So get ready. Never mind arriving on dinghies in the beaches of southern England. Never mind that. Coming in their hundreds. I'm talking millions of refugees will be arriving by land, coming your way soon. There will be many other consequences, one of which almost certainly will be the closure by the British state of RT, in which case you'll have to find me on other platforms, unless those other platforms also begin to shut down. This, of course, will be answered by Russia. There will be no British broadcaster or journalist plying their trade in Russia. Period. Full stop. There will be no ambassadors in London or in Moscow. There will be no journalists in Moscow if there is no broadcasting by RT and Sputnik here in Britain. You see where I'm going with this? This is about to go down the rabbit hole. Now, it may be that the negotiations, which one must presume are going on behind the scenes, will somehow pull a rabbit out of the hat. But it's late for that now. The US government has said, although they didn't tell the Ukrainian government, that the war begins on Wednesday, in which case you can look out for me on my Wednesday night broadcast to react to it, if I'm allowed to make it, of course, because all in the name of freedom and liberty this is being done. So we may be about to enter a period that we have actually never seen. Even at the height of the Cold War, there were ambassadors in place. There were journalists working in each other's country. There was trade between the Eastern Bloc and the West. Now, you may be asking yourself, what's this all about? which is a good question that they are asking in Moscow also. There is no doubt that the psyops, the psychological warfare that has been mounted now for months, is an indication that NATO intends to have a war. But a war for what? All they had to say was that Ukraine, because it has a territorial dispute pre-existing with its neighbor, Russia, cannot join NATO. And that therefore no NATO armies and weapons, including nuclear weapons, will be sighted in Ukraine, at least until Ukraine no longer has a territorial dispute with its neighbor and can join NATO. That's all they had to say, but they would not say it. Now, personally, I think this is a kind of madness. I have said to you many times, I understand the conflict between the West, NATO, and China. China has an ideological system which is an existential threat to Western capitalism and American hegemony. It's obvious why you would have such a standoff with China. But Russia is a white, European, Christian, capitalist country. Why do you need to have Russia as your enemy? I'll tell you why. Because Russia has a leadership that will not allow their country to be ordered around in the way that the German government is absolutely unembarrassed. Joe Biden said in the presence of the German Prime Minister that the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline in Germany will not be allowed to operate. How's that? How's that for a definition of an occupied country? Occupied, yes, by 30,000 American troops, but more importantly, Germany's mind is occupied by the United States hegemon. The only European country that is sufficiently important and powerful enough to have any impact on this situation is France. And to be fair to little Macron, he's doing what he can to avert disaster. But it's quite clear that Germany and most of the other European countries, preeminently my own, of Great Britain, are no more than vassal states of the American empire. And it's going to cost them plenty, not just in gas prices. Because when the conflict moves, as it will, back to China, you will find that the same iron curtain has been brought down between Western countries and China, as is about to be brought down between Western countries and Russia. No more Chinese imports, no more Russian gas, no more glad, confident morning. You know, it's only 6 years since George Osborne and David Cameron announced the beginning of a new golden age between Britain and China. The gold has turned to ash.